Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Rhode Island State House for GoLocal Live and GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the 3 o'clock news and politics show. There's an awareness-raising day today, and I'd like to welcome Krista Brack for Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Awareness Raising. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you can't see it's just out of eyeshot here. The table is just around the corner. Tell folks a little bit about Ehlers-Danlos, this connectivity, this tissue issue, and what it encompasses.
So Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is a connective tissue disorder. There are over 200 different connective tissue disorders, so it's always really good to get diagnosed by someone who understands connective tissue disorders. And what a connective tissue disorder is connective tissue is throughout your entire body, and when it's built faulty, you can lead to systemic problems with your body, especially with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Our big problems are hyperextendability and hyperflexibility of our joints. Our organs can also shift and prolapse, which can be very dangerous. And most people have extreme hypermobility and stretchable skin, which is how a lot of people get noticed.
Okay, so you're here today trying to raise awareness. What do you want legislators to know up here at the State House, Krista?
Well, we would really like them to know that there's a large contingency of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome patients in the state of Rhode Island. We're really lucky here that we have doctors that understand our condition and are able to treat us. So we have a lot of people that travel from out of state just to be able to get here and see these wonderful doctors. And it would really be helpful for us if we had, better care for our insurance paying for physical therapy, and pain management is a very big struggle for people with this condition. Day to day, we have multiple subluxations and dislocations of our joints. And now that happens every day. And a lot of people think that, well, if you're having lots of dislocations, it must not hurt as much. But the reality is that it does. It hurts just as much to dislocate my shoulder for the 100th time as it did the first time. You do get used to it, but the pain is still there. It's very impacting on our lives. And with the recent attention to the opioid epidemic, a lot of us are suffering with getting appropriate pain management.
So as you said, from both the treatment side of things and the pain management side of things, you must do a lot of advocacy.
We do. We try and do a bit. So May is Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Awareness Month. And I have my wonderful awareness t-shirt on. We try and get as much awareness gear as we can to try and bring awareness, because while Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is considered rare, it actually affects 1 in 2,500 to 1 in 5,000 people, which doesn't seem like very rare. I mean, that's a lot of people. As you can see, we have quite a few people here today with us, and our group generally sees 20 to 30 people in a meeting. So there is a prevalence here, and we want to try and get the word out. It would be really great if I didn't have to spell my condition every time I said what it was.
As we have up on GoLocal right now, and you mentioned what you would like the lawmakers to know, and you mentioned being here on the show. What would you like the general public to know?
That, just because someone lives in pain and struggles with mobility issues and maybe can't leave the house very much, they still really need that social interaction, and maybe go and visit someone that that can't mobily get around as much, and have that understanding that we want to be able to engage in life the way that other people do, but it might be a lot harder for us. So a lot of times we have to cancel plans at the last minute, and that can be hard to maintain a social friendship when that's happening. So it'd be really nice with the general public to just have that understanding that, we really want to be engaging in life with our friends and with our family, but it's very difficult.
Well, I appreciate your time being such a strong advocate for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And the big tables over here today, I see legislators already starting to talk with some folks. We'll provide more links and information as well. But Krista, I appreciate your time to be a good spokesperson and an advocate. And thanks for coming on GoLocal Live.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks so much. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back here at the Rhode Island State House. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Rhode Island State House. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for the 3 o'clock news and politics show up here. We'd just like to thank Krista Brack for coming on to talk about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. There's an advocacy day taking place up here, and I appreciate her coming on live. I'd like to welcome my next guest in, Representative Aaron Regenberg, candidate for Lieutenant Governor.
Great to see you, Kate.
Thanks for joining us today. We're in the final sprint to the end of the session, but lots going on. A couple of things I want to ask you about, particularly as it's taking place today. I want to talk with tax legislation for starters. You're co-sponsor of legislation perhaps looking at new and different tax brackets. Talk about this.
Well, Kate, in Rhode Island, our state has cut taxes on the folks at the very top multiple times in recent history. And we always hear the same line, it'll trickle down, it'll create jobs, but it hasn't. What it's done is create this unsustainable revenue system where every year we are cutting back. We're making deeper and deeper cuts to programs that really matter, to our mental health system. We used to have one of the best in the country, and it has been death by 1,000 wounds. To folks with developmental disabilities, where they're facing millions of dollars of cuts this year. Medicaid copays. We're cutting back when in a lot of cases we should be investing more. And so I've introduced legislation to repeal those tax cuts that we've given to the folks at the very top, particularly this year when we know that the Trump administration just passed this historic tax break, the overwhelming ratio of which is going to millionaires and billionaires. We think it's really important that we have a system that asks everyone to pay their fair share so we can actually support our young people, so we can support our seniors, so we can make investments in long-term care, so we can make investments in healthcare. There's a lot of work to do in our communities.
So do you think this has any traction? Have you talked with the speaker about this?
This is always a tough issue. You think about who has the loudest voice in these halls, and it's the folks who can afford well-connected corporate lobbyists who can write the big checks and get into the back rooms. And by and large, those are the folks that are impacted by things like this. So there's not that level playing field when it comes to whose voice is heard up here. I think that's a big problem. And so issues like progressive taxation are always going to have an uphill battle. I introduced this legislation this year to really mirror a ballot referendum, which is looking like it will be on the ballot in Massachusetts right over the border, to have that same millionaires tax. So that's a marginal increase on folks who are making over $1 million every single year.
That's a ballot. That looks like a ballot referendum in Mass.
It's a ballot referendum. The poll, you can't know what happens in the future. The polls all seem to suggest that it looks likely to pass.
And it looks likely to pass.
And so again, Rhode Island says we should keep up.
So would that be possibly the approach that you're looking at from a referendum standpoint?
Well, the legislation I have is legislation. We don't have citizen-initiated ballot referendum in Rhode Island like they have in Massachusetts.
For taxation.
That's how that ballot initiative started in Mass. But I think it's really important that we are fighting for a system that actually works for everyone, that we're fighting for the investments that our neighbors, our most vulnerable communities need, that we are putting the line in the sand to say we cannot be cutting health care that seniors rely on. We cannot be cutting back on the services that our developmental disability community relies on, and legislation like this can make that difference.
Well, I appreciate you talking about this particular piece of legislation. There's also a biomass battle. What's taking place, and give us your vantage point.
So I have a lot of concerns with a particular piece of legislation that seems to be moving very quickly through the legislature, and I know a lot of my colleagues have concerns as well. The bill basically inserts into our current clean energy programs around net metering, and those are bills that I have helped write and helped pass, and I think they're really important. But it basically inserts the incineration of biomass, so basically burning wood, to be counted as a clean energy that ratepayers compensate for. Basically, if this bill passes, I or you could set up in our backyard a facility where we cut down trees and burn the wood, and then get compensated at a rate whose valuation includes the environmental and climate impacts of actual clean energy.
Could that happen at the residential level, or is this really geared towards a sort of big operations?
My understanding is this is legislation that is geared towards one particular special interest, which I think in general is never how we should be passing legislation. We should be looking at a broad scale. Having said that, the legislation allows for anyone to do this. It might be written for a particular special interest, which we should not be doing in general. but it creates a doorway for anyone to engage in practices that I think are not in our environmental interests, not in our climate interests, not in our ratepayer interests, because ratepayers are paying for this. So a lot of environmental groups have been coming out to advocate to try to slow this down, to try to stop it. I will be speaking out forcefully because I think it's important, and I know that a number of my colleagues in the legislature also have concerns.
So while I have you here, a couple of lingering big ticket issues I just want to get your thoughts on. Again, legislation out there for the potential sale or lease of the Providence water supply. We actually had both the Providence water supply and the Narragansett Bay Commission on live on the same day. What's your sense of this, as it's in a bit of a holding pattern right now, but lots of talk and lots of chatter?
So I think there's a number of concerns about anything that is a wholesale selling or privatization of water. That's something that I don't think we should be moving towards at all. I think that there are some ways that our current system and the burdens and responsibilities that Providence has, it's not exactly fair to the local municipalities. So I think we should be looking at the system and potentially making some changes, but I do not think we should be privatizing our water.
And finally, still lots of talk that the leadership might be in talks with the ownership of the Pawtucket Red Sox. What's your thoughts?
So my knowledge on that is based on the same news reports that just came out that you heard, that there may be a new framework that significantly relieves the risk for taxpayers. That sounds like a pretty good situation if that's the case, but I don't have any more details.
Well, we're looking to see if there's more details about that, but still plenty going on up here today, and I appreciate your taking the time to come on live, Representative Aaron Ruggenbrink. Thanks for coming in. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with our next guests here at the Rhode Island State House. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Rhode Island State House for GoLocal Live. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to welcome my next guest on, Representative John Lombardi. Thanks for coming to join us at the State House. You've been in studio before.
Yes, I have.
But we're catching you where the action happens up here at the State House. Now, having served as the president of the City Council, having served as interim mayor of the city of Providence, one of the big ticket issues that's still out there right now is the potential for the sale of the Providence water supply. This is an issue you know closely.
I do. Okay.
Good idea, bad idea?
Well, right now it's a bad idea. Kate, as well, you may or may not remember, but well, you weren't around then. But this issue was bandied about by then Mayor Mayor Cicilline for a long time, and Angel Tavares. And the major question is who owns it. And there's an opinion out there that indicates that the ratepayers own it. I'm in agreement with that. The Providence delegation met with the mayor's staff last week. I thought it was not an appropriate presentation. We indicated to them that this bill would not see any action this year for sure. I offered, that if we could sit down, maybe come to some consensus, if we could make it legal, but we need the definition of the owner to be set forth, and many of us feel that it's the ratepayer that owns it and not the city of Providence. And until we can get over that hurdle, I don't know how we're going to go forward with this
So
issue.
how would you, is that the inappropriateness of it, assuming that the city of Providence owns it without?
Yes.
So where does that legal decision come from?
Well, I think it has to be litigated. I'm of the opinion that once they attempt to sell it, that the ratepayers will hire an attorney, whomever that may be, whomever those ratepayers may be, and restrain and enjoin the city from going forward, and go from there. I would have appreciated had the superintendent of the water supply board been there, the potential owners have been there, the legal brains behind this had been there. But that's not what happened. It was two young associates within the mayor's office trying to make the presentation, and there were no answers forthcoming. No one really had a position. But I can tell you this here: the two co-chairs, Hull and Almeida, indicated that this would never see the light of day this year.
And so when you had that meeting, did you get the sense, were they trying to sell you on it?
Well,
were they trying to sell you on the sale?
I guess no pun intended and none taken. However, it just wasn't appropriate. I mean, you don't come to something of that magnitude of $500, $600, $700 million sale, selling Providence's greatest asset, and not knowing the nuances, like the tax consequences, not only in the city of Providence, but what about Situate? What about the surrounding cities and towns? What about the people who purchase it from the Situate, but more importantly, the ratepayers?
So talk with us a little bit about the impetus for doing so. Of course, the talk is if the sale happens, it can be an infusion to help the city with its unfunded pension liability. GoLocal contributor Michael Riley said that he would like to see state oversight if it were to happen, to see that it was done structurally and correctly. But just in principle, that one-time cash infusion, what does it say about the city of Providence in your estimation?
Well, it states that what it tells me is that we're only as strong as the weakest cockroach. Once the weakest cockroach lets go, the entire kingdom is going to fall. Look, we should talk about amortization of our debt. We should talk about bilateral discussions with the unions, not unilateral, as this administration was warned with regard to the firemen. We said this is never going to happen, and what happened? We had to pay them $6.3 million in legal fees and
we just saw council members meeting, and again, I had Paul Dowdy on, and he was not part of the even most recent conversation in the last month.
Exactly. When there's 5 parties to an issue, you don't invite 4, you invite all 5, and to conspicuously leave them out of the equation just makes no sense to me. So it's going to be about givebacks. It's about tough negotiation, amortization of the debt, and just really cutting back. But this all happens with communication and discussion.
Sounds like someone who might be interested in looking at the city of Providence from a municipal level.
Well, maybe. You may be right. That may be a very astute observation on your part.
Well, we'll continue to see what happens moving forward again, but lots of talk about this legislation for the potential sale and or lease of the Providence water supply. We certainly got the opinion from Representative John Lombardi. Representative, thank you for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with our next guest here at the Rhode Island State House. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Rhode Island State House for GoLocal Live and GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to welcome my next guest in, the House Minority Leader, Patricia Morgan, Republican candidate for governor. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it, as it's a busy time of year right now, but you've been putting out a number of statements and positions on some political issues. Wanted to talk with you a little bit about. Let's start with the Convention Center Authority. This was on the heels of GoLocal's look, particularly at the Dunkin' Donuts Center, where things are at in terms of programming. Fairly dark for the summer, and you've been on the Convention Center.
Yeah, for 4 years.
Yeah.
We studied it 4 years ago, and I'm glad that you have been keeping track of them. We get busy, and I don't always go back and check on it, but clearly they're not doing their job. 4 years ago, we studied it. We studied it thoroughly, and we actually showed, their costs are way too high. Their overhead is way too high. They actually pay their wait staff $80,000 a year plus benefits. There's a lot of waitresses and waiters out there who would really like to have that. Their costs are very, very high. Their benefits, their salaries, very generous. I'm not saying they don't give something to Rhode Island, but what I'm saying is they're not maximizing what they can give to us. Because in the 4 years since we put out that report and suggested solutions, simple ones like have a marketing plan, they have taken another $135 million in taxpayer dollars. That's not acceptable. They really need, and I'm actually very disappointed in the governor, and I know I'm running against her, but at the time I reached out to her and I said, here is our study. It shows you glaring issues with this, the Convention Center Authority. Do something. They were in the beginning of a contract cycle. They should have been, she should have gotten active with them and said, you need to make changes. She didn't. So they've just gone happily on their way, bringing in their big salaries and not giving value back to taxpayers, and that's not acceptable.
So as you've mentioned, you've got a couple hats here. You've been looking at it from the legislative perspective, but now as you're eyeing the state's composition as well, just you're kind of running on the platform of looking to rein this in.
Absolutely. They should not be taking, they should be paying at least their own overhead, and they're not even doing that. So they need to start acting like they're a professional organization. Your newspaper highlighted that during the recent basketball games, they had so much moisture on the floor, it was dangerous for players to be on the floor. And the manager, who has been there forever, said, well, it's cold outside and it's warm in here. What do you expect?
And it happened once before as well. This wasn't the first time it had happened.
Truly, I expect him to know how to make sure that the floor conditions are in their best possible shape. And he should have been reprimanded. Something happened, and yet we don't hear anything about it. So what I've done is I've asked the Convention Center Authority to tell me what they have done in the 4 years, what they did to that manager who did such a bad job, gave Rhode Island and our dunk a black eye. I want to see their marketing plan to see if it's any better than, kind of written on the back of a napkin. They can maximize value to Rhode Island, and that's the thing everybody should know. When they bring folks in, there's more activity throughout the city, throughout the state. When they are dark, when they take the summer off, they're not bringing those dollars here. They're not doing anything for our economy.
Well, one of the issues that Representative Patricia Morgan has been highlighting, again, both in her position here at the State House and looking at the governor's position, let's talk a little bit about your quest to get some answers on Google money.
Yes. So the state got $230 million from the Google settlement funds. It was split between 5 jurisdictions. The Attorney General got about $60 million of it. When the Parkland shootings happened, I thought, what a perfect thing. Not perfect that they got shot, but there's this Google money. We should take that money and start getting security upgrades for our schools. Keep our kids safe. Right, if you can keep a shooter on the outside of a building, the kids inside are safe. So we called over to the Attorney General's office to find out how much money was left. Crickets. They couldn't tell us. We went to the budget office. The budget office said as far as they could figure out, it was about 23 million. We, looked at all the press reports. It looked like 23 million. So 23 million. I also actually sent an access to public records request over to the Attorney General asking for the information. How have you spent this money? How much is left? Doesn't want to give it to me. Decided he'd charge me nearly $4,000 for that information. I appealed. When you appeal it, guess what? You appeal to the Attorney General. So, of course, he turned me down again. There is a state law that says because I am an elected official, I'm a decision maker, I'm a minority leader, I'm on the Finance Committee and the Oversight Committee, that I am entitled to those documents. But he's not budging. So now I'm going to the Superior Court. I'm representing myself because I can't afford it. And that's his game, right? Make it so expensive that I will give up.
Does this just
I don't give up very easily. I'm pretty much a fighter.
Does this have an optics and a transparency issue? Again, this is Google settlement money that you would think, again, I'm sure there's lots of documents, but from a transparency standpoint,
he doesn't believe in it. The Attorney General does not believe that he needs to be transparent, and clearly he doesn't believe that he needs to be accountable either for all that money that's been spent. And worse, there were two town committees, Portsmouth and Barrington, and I really applaud them. They looked at this and said, oh, $75,000 per school. So if you take 23 million, divide it by 306 public schools, you get $75,000. They said, wow, give that to us. We'd like our children to be safer. And good for them for stepping up and saying, yeah, give us that money. We'll put it to good use. The Attorney General decided to ridicule them, to criticize them, to mock them because they were doing it. That is so unacceptable from a public official, especially our chief law enforcement official in the state. He is not above the law. He is not above accountability. And I expect him to answer every elected official with some dignity and responsibility. So I am going to go to court soon. I have to wait. I've sent him a letter. I put in a complaint. Have to wait for him to answer it. And I will be in court. And hopefully the judge will waive that $3,770 fee, and I will get those documents. This is what I know. The Attorney General appears to have bought 3 Chevy Impalas from a dealership north of Boston. He has bought a $15 million customer service center for the Attorney General's office. I wonder where the study was that they had so many customer service requests that they needed a whole building to do it in. They rented a generator for $75,000 that would have cost them $10,000 to buy.
So you found some interesting information already.
I got some, and I want to find out the answers. I think I deserve them. More than that, I think the people of Rhode Island deserve them.
Well, I appreciate your breaking down that particular issue. One more while we're here at the State House today. There's a number of bills looking at truck tolls and potential for repealing truck tolls. Now, you're a co-sponsor of some. Of course, when we've had you in studio, you've talked as running on the platform of being the no-toll governor. Do you have the sense that there's any potential from a legislative standpoint right now in 2018 to look to change what's currently in place for roadworks?
Not on a legislative. I mean, we're putting these bills in. We will give a good defense for why tolls are bad for Rhode Island. I think the people of Rhode Island know they're bad and they don't want them. We fought this battle and the people fought this battle with us. We will continue to oppose them. If I'm lucky enough to be elected governor, I will stop them. But we will continue to fight either way to keep them from coming to Rhode Island. They are just going to be a way to grow more revenue for government to spend and take it out of people's wallets, and that's not good for anybody.
Well, as I said, because it's up today, I wanted to ask you about that as well, but covered a number of issues: convention center, where that Google money is going, and of course the truck toll issue.
Where it went.
Where? What exactly? Now where it's going.
And now we're going to find out where it went.
Where it went. Well, Patricia Morgan, I appreciate your taking the time to come on today here at the Rhode Island State House. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back here at Rhode Island State House. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Rhode Island State House for Go Local Live. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to welcome my next guest, Representative Dan McKiernan. Thank you for joining us today.
Very welcome. Glad to be here.
I appreciate it because this is something that Go Local has been working on and looking at for a while. This pertains to the Ethics Commission and its transparency and availability of documents to the public. Legislation was introduced. Representative McKiernan, prime sponsor. It's going to be on the House floor this afternoon. So talk with us a little bit when this issue came to light of the public being able to access these ethics forms to know not just elected officials, but appointed officials as well. What was your thought process of why this is needed?
Well, as you know, appointed officials have significant powers within the government. So given that it's out there for elected officials, we thought it fair to be more transparent. The main concern, which was voiced, but although the bill wasn't opposed, it was voiced, was hackers and having too much information on the internet.
So that's an interesting concern to have. Of course, you know, people fill these out and send them there. But does it look like it's got the traction today to get approval in the House?
I do, because we vetted that very significantly at the committee level, and you know, I think it's a fair balance given what has transpired in Rhode Island's past. It's more important to have more transparency, and to the extent that it ever becomes a problem, we can always revisit it.
Well, you would hope if someone submits something, if something were to happen on the other side, they could say, this was my original submission in the first place.
Right.
I don't own this much stock in Exxon.
Right, and right, exactly. It's almost, but they're worried about the Russian hacker was the example that was discussed. But we did have real problems historically, and we're trying to do away with those.
Well, again, this is legislation when Go Local took a look at the Ethics Commission, not just the timeliness, oftentimes they'd respond via email with any requests, but looking particularly, it was the Coventry Town Manager Go Local was looking for the ethics form for. Took them days to figure out they did not actually have on file. So it looks like everything else around the state, hopefully we're getting it up to 21st century here. We'll hear that on the floor this afternoon. While I have you on here, anything else you want to share with viewers?
Well, that's a great point. I want to thank Go Local for the work that it does. You guys plunge into things in detail, and we really appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate, again, this legislation we'll hear on the floor this afternoon. Representative McKiernan, thank you for taking the time to come down here.
Thanks very much.
I'll let you go around the corner, and we'll wrap up here at Go Local. It's been a full day giving you the rundown of who we had here on in studio. Started off with Krista Brack. She's an advocate here for Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It's an awareness day here up at the State House, letting folks know a little bit more about that. Representative John Lombardi, the former interim mayor of the city of Providence, talking about his opposition of the legislation as it currently stands to either potentially sell or lease the Providence water supply. Representative Aaron Ruggenberg talking about tax issues here, looking to see about changing the structure back from the tax cuts that have been implemented, as well as biomass legislation. House Minority Leader Patricia Morgan and Representative Dan McKiernan. That just about wraps up us here at the Rhode Island State House. Be sure to tune in this evening at 7 o'clock. Go Local has a special event, Where is America Going? Jim Murphy, President Donald Trump's political director, will be here. We'll also have Bob Whitcomb, and we'll also have Mike Sheehan, the former president of the Boston Globe, and myself on the panel, Where is America Going at 7 o'clock. We look forward to seeing you. I'm Go Local News editor Kate Nagel.